I don't know. Does it sound better now?
There we go.
All
Oh, I
right.
see. It's you sent it out to your channel.
I
Yeah, I
did.
think you have the they do a thing where you can do it horizontal and vertical, but you do a lot of live streaming on different apps, right? Like it's is it Instagram?
Not lately. I have been kind of off the sauce, but I do some stuff on TikTok, mostly YouTube on my screen here. But I might be set, like I might have my stuff set up to do both, but I don't think it's affecting your channel. But I can see
Y-
we're vertical somewhere else.
yeah. So I tried streaming it to both. If you're streaming to mobile devices, that's a good reason to stream to both because it's better for the phone. The flip side is it splits the chat in two, which was driving me crazy.
Oh,
So, so anyway, up to
okay.
you whether you
Everything
like it. That's just my limited experience.
everything should come to you. So if you have a problem, let me know, and I can fix it if you can tell me how.
Yeah, we're all good. We're all good.
All right, cool.
I just had a total boomer moment where I was talking muted apparently for a lengthy period of time. So, the good news is whatever scintillating legal analysis I was sharing will be fresh for you. So there you go.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that was part of why I was like, I got to get set up, and my mic was off, and I was like, what's going on? But anyway, here we're all set and ready to go to talk about a
yeah,
freaking
I
hot
make these
topic.
I make these mistakes from time to time, but by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know her, Lawyer Chick and I had a great debate on Sarah the Raging Tomatoes channel about whether or not we should abolish the Department of Education. And it was the rare public debate where, we just never got nasty with each other. We just had a polite conversation about ed policy and how we think we could make things better, which is, I think, what set up this conversation, because obviously we can be adults and talk about a challenging topic without being totally insane. But if you want to, let the people know who you are and where to find you, so they can find your content, take a second, introduce yourself. You're muted.
I am.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is, I'm Lawyer Chick here on YouTube and also on TikTok, which was the platform I was on for a long time before I started YouTube. So now at Lawyer Chick 5000, the creator, the lawyer, the TikTok lawyer, formerly known as Jenny Justice, and kind of started this Lawyer Chick channel a couple of years ago, and I just like it, so it's time to change. So you can find me here. Most of my content is privated right now on YouTube, but if you go on TikTok to Lawyer Chick 5000, you'll see a whole hundreds of phenomenal legal videos that are a lot of fun. And have my dogs, and I just kind of riff on all kinds of stuff. But for a long time, I was making regular legal content, especially during COVID. Came up. So it's good to be with another licensed attorney, and I will only be on YouTube panels now with attorneys. I'm going to kind of stick to straight legal content. So thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, that Department of Education debate conversation that we had kind of inspired me to apply for a pretty conservative legal fellowship here. I am in the DC area. And yeah, I will see if they pick me, right? But
that would be fun.
It will be fun. I wanted to kind of run it by you before I applied, because I was like, can I even hang? But I ran it by a few other people, and then some really conservative lawyers that were like, you know what? The worst that can happen is you'll just learn something, or they'll say no, but either way, I think I'll learn a lot. And I think when it comes to conservative stuff, I have some stuff in common with it's the America First Legal Fellowship is what I applied for. So I have some things in common with these folks and some things not. And, definitely immigration is a place I do not support a lot of what they're doing. And that's clear with my resume. And I actually wrote like a follow-up to my cover letter, which was like, this is a time that we should come together and fix immigration law. And since I've always been very pro-immigrant, melting pot type of person, it's hard. It's hard to watch what's going on right now. I have a lot of secondary trauma all the time. I work with a lot of youth. I work with lot of immigrants. I represent, I'm a general counsel for a couple nonprofits that are immigrant based, and they're very scared. It's very hard to 25 years of my life spending it with people that, I care about for whatever reasons. So I think immigration law has been broken for a long time. I think the Democrats have used it as a political football, and they've really, I think, intentionally prevented doing anything really solid about fixing things. And we're paying for that now. And now what's happening is we have people just in fear, and it's just hard, to be with people in this situation and have like 2 days ago, a young man came to me, a student came and was like, my dad's in detention. His hearing is Friday. Do you think he'll be deported? And, I had to say, yeah, I do. And, where's the relief, right? Do you ever practice immigration law?
Yeah, I'm not, it's not obviously what I do primarily. I've done, I think, 2 asylum cases.
Okay.
So I've done some. Hey, Grit, what's going on, buddy? Good to have you.
Yeah, and hey, everybody. I love the chat. It's great to see everyone.
Good to see a chat filling up. And by the way, before we launch into the topic du jour, if you're sub to me and not sub to her or vice versa, you probably should sub to the other person. We cover law. We have areas of agreement. We have areas of disagreement. You'll probably enjoy each other's content. So if you're not sub to her and you're sub to me, please do so. And if you're sub to her and not to me, consider subbing. I think you'll find some stuff you enjoy. But to your point, one of the really interesting things about law that I think people outside of law don't recognize, and unfortunately this norm is starting to fade, but there has historically been a really strong norm in law about, you fight it out in the courtroom and then you go to the bar, right? Because it's a small world, it's a small profession, and you treat each other with courtesy and dignity, even if you disagree about the case, even passionately, right? And when I was in law school, one of my professors told this story about he was involved in the tobacco litigation, the class actions back then.
Oh yeah.
And
sure.
That was big law, big cases.
Massive. Yes.
And I made some quip about the who would want to represent big tobacco, because I'd never done big law yet and had no idea what kind of clients I would represent over the years, right? So innocent me, I was like, who would represent big tobacco? And he says, no, he said, there was the first tobacco case was bought by this tiny little firm. And as the cases developed, bigger firms took over, and now they were the leads, right? And this tiny firm got pushed to the side.
Yeah.
And at the end, when the tobacco cases settled, this tiny firm wasn't going to get paid out. They were going to get almost nothing because they hadn't been managing the class action along the way. And I'll never forget what he said. He goes, and then the honorable lawyers for big tobacco wrote to the judge to remind him that these were the people who found the first plaintiffs that got the ball rolling, and they should be compensated for their contributions to the case. And you don't, obviously they didn't have to do that, right? But that's kind of how I think law should be practiced, right? You can disagree and still have productive and useful conversations and be decent to each other, right? And to your point about immigration, immigration law is deeply broken. It has not been in good shape in this country for a long time.
If ever.
And quite frankly, before the birthright citizenship debate was sparked, I had never spent 2 seconds thinking about it. I simply assumed we had universal birthright citizenship because no one had ever questioned it. I didn't bother, even in law school, I'll just be candid, I didn't read any cases.
Sure.
I didn't do any analysis. I was just like, of course, we have universal birthright citizenship. Everyone assumes it. That's what we have, right? So that was my baseline going into this argument, which I think I started at to me, if you have an unquestioned practice, that's an 80% chance that probably that's what the Constitution says. It'd be weird if everyone was wrong about it for so long, I guess would be one way of looking at it.
I didn't really know where it came from either. I just thought you're born in this country. Whatever soil you're born on is where your citizenship. But do you remember in family law where you studied the cases around paternity, and there was I think the defining case for paternity was a Vietnamese mother and a military father, and there was a soldier, I guess, who sired a child with a Vietnamese woman, and then the child grew up and wanted to claim U.S. citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, the court was like, no, but then it turned. It went up the ladder, and then it was determined that yes, if you have a parent that's a U.S. citizen, then and I believe you have to even some kind of relationship with the child, then that child can claim the citizenship. But now, I mean, I'm wondering if they just did a paternity suit, if they would get it. But I just remember that. So I remember that came out in family law. But immigration, it's just something I just assumed that.
Yeah.
Was there.
Yeah. I think we just assumed it. We talk about it, birthright citizenship. It's a concept, but I never actually examined it. So I would say for me, I started out being like 80% Trump loses on this case. Now, having read more, I'm down to like 60-40. I still think he probably loses, but I'm not sure. Well, and I might be talking myself into it. I might be drinking the Kool-Aid on the argument that I think they're going to make. But maybe we can hash that out tonight. What do you? But anyway, where are you? Where do you?
What argument do you think they're going to make? Because I was reading just the SCOTUS blog today, and I saw that they're basing the Trump administration is coming from a case called Barbara, is it, or Douglas v. something? And I believe, the Trump administration's argument is is it the 14th Amendment that gives the birthright citizenship was essentially came from the Dred Scott decision, which held that people who were, born to slaves were free. And I think the Trump administration is making an interesting argument here that this was very clearly meant to provide citizenship for children of slaves.
Yeah.
And I get that. And I'm wondering how they're going other than, I think the argument against it is, well, there's 30 countries that you can be born in and you get citizenship in that country. And, so they're but when has the US ever cared or adopted other countries' law? It's not binding authority. It's not even primary authority. It's sometimes persuasive if you're, Sotomayor, somebody like that might take it as persuasive authority on just a living constitution argument, right? That there's so many, immigrants here that have children, and those children deserve to have a country that they know, right? If two people from India are working in the Silicon Valley and they are on H1B1 visas and they live here for 30 years and then they have a child, is that child going to be a citizen of India? How is that child going? It's a public policy argument. Like, how is that child going to be a citizen of India?
Well, let me try to lay an originalist argument on you, and you can tell me what you think of it. Okay. Again, I'm going to be putting on my argumentative hat just to make the argument, but I'm 60-40 on this. I'm not I'm not entirely sure if I am buying what I'm selling, but here's how I think the argument is going to go. Can you see the language of the 14th on screen too? Okay. So all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens, right? So subject to the jurisdiction thereof must be doing some work. Yeah. It limits the category of born or naturalized. It does something, right? And I don't think the text makes the limitations totally clear by itself. Like, for example, we know that today, if you are the child of a diplomat born in this country, you do not get birthright citizenship because your parents were not subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
Is right? That so?
Yeah. And we also know
oh.
if like a British warship was docked in a harbor in New York, and two sailors were fraternizing, and one of the sailors gave birth at a hospital in New York, they would not have U.S. citizenship because British soldiers on a warship are not, even if they went to a U.S. hospital or they're in U.S. waters, because they're not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And this is no longer the case because we passed a law in 1925 that gave Indian citizenship. But prior to 1925, if you were a Native American and you were born on a reservation and you didn't pay taxes, you were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So even if they had children within a state, they were not citizens. So we know this language does something. The question is, how far does it go? And the people who are pro what's called universal birthright citizenship say it goes exactly as far as I just laid out. It's those three exceptions and no other exceptions, right?
Okay.
And the people who think like Sauer or the Trump team are going to argue that it should have more exceptions, and then they're going to want to look at the history to make the argument that this term should be interpreted more broadly than just those narrow exceptions. So I think that's like the frame of the argument, right?
Okay.
Like how many exceptions fit into this term? So far, buying what I'm selling or nah?
Well, no, I think you're right. And then, but I'm kind of with in the comments, James, not Jimmy. If you are a citizen, are you a citizen if you visit Florida from Canada for a week? I don't think you're a citizen if you visit Florida from Canada for a week because you're not born or naturalized in the United States. But you are subject to the jurisdiction of Florida while you're on U.S. soil.
Yeah.
So I think anybody who's on the soil is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So I think the key here is the and.
And this is a great example, right? Because let's say, women this pregnant should not get on planes, but let's take that out of the equation for now because that's not the point. Let's say a Canadian woman flies to Florida and she gives birth to her child in Florida and then flies back to Canada with the child.
Happens all about Russian and Chinese tourism, right? Birth tourism.
Yes.
It's a huge industry.
Birth tourism is real. The child was a person born in the United States, and according to the kind of like the liberal position, is subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and therefore is a citizen of the United States. Whereas what the Trump team is arguing is, yes, that child was born in the United States, but subject to the jurisdiction is better interpreted to mean having complete political allegiance. That you would be actually you owe allegiance to the United States. That's what this should mean. It should be limited to people who have true allegiance.
But how can you quantify or even qualify somebody's allegiance? Because you're here, you're subject to the jurisdiction. You don't get to choose. If you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the soil you're on, then you're breaking the law or you're willing to break the law and you'll face the consequences.
Yeah. So this is the question, right? And I think this is why I still think the people opposed to Trump here have the better of the argument because jurisdiction, the natural reading of jurisdiction is subject to the laws, right? And I think that that's the easiest way to read it. So what the people who are, what Sauer is going to have to do is provide a historical case for why this term should be read a different way. And
I'm going to look up the case that they're going to use this.
And they're going to have to distinguish this case called Wong Kim Ark. Because Wong Kim Ark was the big birthright citizenship case. So I think there's two pieces that John Sauer, the Solicitor General, is going to have to go after. The historic meaning of this term to try to get the originalists interested, and then how to either argue that Wong Kim Ark should be overturned or how you could render a limitation consistent with Wong-Kim arc.
And can they? Because Wong-Kim arc, I'm looking at it now. Oh, in the case of Barber, Trump v. Barber is the instant case. That's the case that they're going to look at. So I don't know what. And they brought this up earlier, but it was a jurisdictional issue. So everybody was all excited a few months ago, like, oh, they're talking about birthright citizenship, but they weren't talking about birthright citizenship for birthright citizenship. They were talking about whether or not a federal judge had the right to do a national injunction on any case. And that decision was no.
Yeah, that was CASA, which was a big case. But
so that pushed, this this factual piece down the curb.
So, by the way, Grid, just to answer your question here, are citizens of the United States, it's like, think of this like if then. They're saying if you're born or naturalized and you're subject, you are a citizen. It's they're not saying that you must be a citizen. They're saying all persons born or naturalized and subject to jurisdiction are citizens. That's so like if this and this, then citizen, right? And
that's how I read it.
Yeah. So it's not a requirement that your parents are citizens. It's a requirement necessarily. It's saying if this is true and this is true, then citizen.
Yep.
So historically, here's the evidence that I find interesting. There's a lot of statements that you could look at the historic record that go both ways, to be honest with you. Like you're going to find friends on both sides of this issue. But what I found interesting, and you referenced it earlier, was that the 14th Amendment came out of the Civil War.
Yeah.
And prior to the Civil War, there's the Dred Scott decision that said basically Black people can never be citizens no matter what. And that's the law. That was the constitutional law. So even post-Civil War, this law still existed. Mm-hmm. So now, the president is saying Black people are free, Black people are citizens, but the law says they aren't. So they had to fix that. And how did they go about fixing that? They passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and then they passed they ratified the 14th Amendment, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And this was 1868, so these were only 2 years apart. Now, what's really interesting is the Civil Rights Act of 1866 had very different language. It said, all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed, are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. So this, not subject to any foreign power, that sounds a lot more like, complete political allegiance. So the question is, did Congress change its mind between 1866 and 1868, and that's why they changed the language? Or did they think this kind of meant the same thing, and they preferred this language over that language, but like they didn't change? No one really changed their mind on this issue in between, right? Because the language definitely changed.
Yeah.
This language, not subject to any foreign power, that's pretty good for Team Trump. This language, a lot less clear.
But go back. What does it mean, not subject to any foreign power? I mean, that would mean I don't have citizenship anywhere else, to me.
Yeah, so like
I'm born here. I'm not an Indian. I'm not Mexican. I'm born here, so I'm not subject to any foreign power.
Well, if you think about it this way, like if your parents are Canadian, right? The government, you owe allegiance to a foreign power, right? You owe allegiance to Canada. Like in terms of your like birth tourism examples, like let's say someone from Russia is pregnant, comes here, tries to have a baby in order to create citizenship. That woman owes allegiance to Russia. The child, Russia probably has a claim on the child as well. Like I don't think that child doesn't have Russian citizenship, right? So I think the argument would be that under this, subject to any foreign power language, if you owe allegiance to a foreign power, you would not be declared a citizen of the United States.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
But the language did change. The language did change quite a bit. So I don't know that argument is winning because the language changed, and the counter argument would be, well, they changed the language because they wanted to change the meaning.
I think Smoke Steve kind of nailed it. Subject to any foreign power is a soldier. So if you're go back to so if you're born in the United States and you're not a soldier, but what soldier would be born here?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, subject to any foreign power, I think you like. Well, let me put it this way. Here, this is Wong Kim Ark.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at the way that this is the holding, they said the evident intention and necessary effect of the submission of this case to the decision of the court upon the facts agreed upon by the parties, where to present for determination the single question stated at the beginning of this opinion, namely, whether a child born in the United States of parents of Chinese descent, who at the time of his birth are subjects of the Emperor of China, but have a permanent domicile and residence in the United States, and are there carrying on business, and are not employed in any diplomatic or official capacity under the Emperor of China, becomes at the time of his birth a citizen of the United States. For the reasons stated above, this court is of the opinion that the question must be answered affirmative. So when I see this, like their focus here is on, like, there's a focus here. Were his parents, yes, they were subjects of the Emperor of China, but they're really checking, like, were they employed by the Emperor of China? Do they owe, like, there is a little bit of a focus on, like, yes, these people were long-term permanent domiciliaries of the United States and lived and worked here for a long time. But if they owed allegiance to a foreign power, if they were, like colonels in the Chinese army, or nobles or something, like, then I think the court that seemed to be a fact that's relevant to the court, which is why they're talking about so much about whether or not the extent of their allegiance to China.
Yeah, and I'm wondering about the timing of this case, and I think it's so interesting that it's the Chinese that have brought us really the biggest immigration laws.
Mm-hmm.
That is like foundational, right? Like I'm looking at the Chinese Exclusion Act. That was 1882.
Yeah.
So you had 1882 where no Chinese laborers they couldn't immigrate for 10 years. They could not get citizenship. They needed certificates, anti-immigrants. They were built the railroads, and then they said, we're done with you. And then 1882, 92, 16 years later, this comes up. So what were Wong Kim Ark, what was he doing here?
So the Chinese Exclusion Acts were critical to this case, because what basically happened is his parents were here, right? And if I recall correctly, I haven't read the whole thing recently, but if I recall correctly, they were merchants, not laborers, and that distinction mattered under the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Okay, yeah, it was only laborers.
It excluded laborers, but not like white collar type people.
Mm-hmm,
kind of like a modern H-1B1 situation.
Yeah,
a historic
totally.
H-1B1. Yeah,
1,000,000%.
So then he was born here. His family left and went back to China. He went to visit them. Then he tried to come back. They said, you are not a merchant and you are Chinese, and under American law, you may not enter the country because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And he said, no, I'm a citizen, therefore those laws don't apply to me. And why is he a citizen? Because he was born here, right? Yes. And a big, big part of what's going to happen before the court, in my humble opinion, is the pro-universal birthright citizenship team is going to say, this is a broad ruling that says, if you were born here, you are a citizen, with these few caveats. And that's dictated by English common law, which the Supreme Court relied upon. That's what this term means. And Trump's team is going to say, wait a minute, let's look at this holding. they went out of their way to say these are not people who have official capacity under the Emperor of China, and these are people who have a permanent domicile in America. They're not birth tourists. They're not illegals who slipped over the border and had a baby. They had a permanent domicile. They worked in America for years and years and years. Though someone like that does get birthright citizenship, but somebody who came over from Russia to have a baby would not be in that category. So I think those are going to be that's going to be how these teams line up to fight about the meaning of this case.
Yeah, but I think the spirit of what was literally Donald Trump's first executive order, which was to deny birthright, to get rid of birthright citizenship. I think the spirit of that order was not to stop birth tourism as much as it was to just stop what they call the anchor babies. I have a lot of students, and I know a lot of people whose parents have been here 15, 20 years, and then they were born here, and now they're citizens. And there's a lot of people like that. And they can sponsor their parent at 21. So if I'm born here, and then I can sponsor my parents at the age of 21, and that's that whole theory of anchor babies. And I think that's what this administration is trying to squash and quash, just end, is children who are born here and then have an allegiance to immigration. And usually, until recently, Democrats, which is just, screw the Democrats. But so I think the spirit of this is not necessarily to stop people who pop in, have their babies and leave, but more to stop this massive number of, and I don't even know how many people were born here to undocumented parents. We can look, but I think it was to stop that. And I get it, because it's very much along the lines with what they're trying to do. And one thing that this administration knows, they know immigration law, and they really do. And I'm one of the things that drove me to apply for this very conservative legal fellowship is that the people who are on the foundation, they've been at Homeland Security for 20, 30 years. They've been in these top, government lawyer positions on the side of the Trump administration. It's just that the majority has always been more to the left, more to the melting pot theory, more to liberal borders. So I think this is just an attempt, as they've done quite well. They're really going at it every way to Sunday to just get rid of people and delegitimize people from being here who weren't born here.
Well, I think it's probably worth looking at the text of the order to see what it would do, because I haven't done that in a while. So I pulled it up, and it says that the policy of the United States shall be that they will not give citizenship or documents to persons when that person's mother was unlawfully present in the United States, and that person's father was not a United States citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah. Yes. So this goes. I would guess that goes for, let's assume that Trump wins at the Supreme Court.
Oh, but then look at number two. That goes to your birth tourism.
Or when the president of the United States was lawful but temporary.
Because those people come over on tourist visas. They're legit. They got it. Some of them have a ton of money. So they get their tourist visa. They come over at 7 months. They get a 6-month visa, and they go into these clinics in Florida and squeeze the baby out. Yeah.
No, but here's the thing that I think is, I do not think the Supreme Court is going to overturn Wong Kim Ark. It's a very old case that we've relied on for a long time. I think
why not? What grounds are they going to deny it? Because I have a public policy kind of humanitarian reason in my head of why they would deny it, but why won't they?
Well, that doesn't mean Trump's going to lose. I think if Trump wins, I think they're going to limit the scope of the holding of Wong Kim Ark and limit its breadth, but keep it as good law. I don't think they have the votes to overturn it.
So how could they limit it? What could limit? It's you are or you're not.
Well, this is what I'm saying. I think they'd limit it by looking back here. I think they'd say, well, let's look at what the court said. Here's the question presented. They said, what about a guy whose parents were Chinese and were citizens of China, but had permanent domicile and residence in the US and carried on business, and are not part of China? Does that guy get birthright citizenship?
So those are your H-1B. Those are your H-1B1 workers.
Well, I think the key here is permanent domicile. I think the court might say if you have permanent domicile,
yeah, but
then you are subject to the jurisdiction thereof. But if you do not have permanent domicile, you don't. And the question then would be, if you're here illegally for like 20 years and you never leave and you just work here and live here, is that permanent domicile? I would say probably yes, in my mind.
Yeah, you've got bills in your name. You've got your, probably a driver's license in some states.
According to Trump's executive order, the answer would be no.
No, right.
So in my opinion, even if Trump wins before the court, he's not going to win by that margin, right? I think they'd have a more limited holding than his wish list, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I could see a world where the court says, to have birthright citizenship, you must show allegiance to the United States, which at minimum requires permanent domicile status.
So what is permanent domicile?
I'm not sure. In personal jurisdiction, it's residence with intent to remain.
Yeah. So your car is registered in your name. You've got some bills in your name. You're getting mail to a U.S. address. You have a lease. You plan on staying. You're not a tourist, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think this might be something the court does, because they could do that without overturning Wong Kim Ark. If you wanted to give Trump everything, you would have to overturn Wong Kim Ark. And I think Justice Thomas might, but I can't imagine getting 5 votes to overturn this case. It just seems, it seems hugely unlikely to me. So at least that's me reading the tea leaves. I don't think that's likely or possible. So, like Cacophons, I see is freaking out in chat.
Love it.
The argument I'm making, I'm trying to present an argument that I think could get 5 or 6 votes at the Supreme Court level. The argument that you overturn this case completely, I think is dead on arrival. And I think it's dead on arrival because this is a case that's hundreds of years old. We've been using it and living with it for a long time. No one's questioned it. It doesn't have any of the hallmarks of like a case like Roe v. Wade, where it's been tightly contested and everyone's litigating it. And it's been a huge problem the whole time it's existed. So the court overturns it. A case that's been on the books for 150, 100, 200, not 200 years, 125 years.
Yeah.
And nobody's litigated it up till now. That just doesn't seem like the sort of thing the Supreme Court would overturn.
Also, with Roe v. Wade, there's a strong moral issue there.
Yeah.
And this case doesn't necessarily have that moral, religious, right to life, when does life begin kind of issue, right? This is just who gets the rights. And I guess for me, it goes to again, and a humanitarian or just a practical application of it. What are you going to do if you do not, what are you going to do if you don't give people citizenship who were born here? Where are those children going to be? And the court has always sided with, as a public policy issue, with children and children's right to be better, under the law. So, the case of Plyer v. Doe, which gives immigrant children the right to a K-12 education for free. Plyer v. Doe was a case where the state of Texas was starting to charge money for immigrant children to attend free public schools. And the court said, we're going to allow those children to attend public schools because it's better for society if those children are educated and become productive members of society, as opposed to, creating this massive class divide, right? If we don't allow immigrant children to attend K-12 schools, you're going to have crime and this very uneducated, like lowly class of people that just kind of is massive and rises up. So I think they were looking at it more of like that was definitely a living interpretation, right, of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So for this one, it's like, I mean, do you think they'll retroactively take away people's
No,
citizenship? Okay.
because
So
because
moving,
Trump's executive order only applies to people born after February of 2026.
okay. So do you think it would read something like, I mean, what if they attached it to certain types of visas? Like if your parents were here for a certain amount of time, now your children would have, birthright citizenship. Do you think
Yeah,
they could do, I don't even think there's
I,
grounds to do
I
anything
don't
like
I don't
that.
think that would work because then you'd get into reliance interest. Like people built their lives around their citizenship and their kids' citizenship. I think that honestly, the Trump team that wrote this executive order had some decent lawyers on there, and they knew we need this to be forward looking only because if it's backwards looking, it's going to have all kinds of it would just have catastrophic legal problems. So I think that they that was good. That was good advice to avoid that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of policy, though, that's a tough one, right? Because on the one hand, there's something very quintessentially American about birthright citizenship. So I think there's an argument there. But the flip side is, I was giving this example to chat earlier. Let's say there was a Chinese or a Russian billionaire, and you don't have to stretch to imagine these people exist. They do, with some hostile views about the United States and
Yeah.
wanting to conduct espionage and all kinds of other things and steal state secrets. And they used a surrogate program to just impregnate 1,000 women. And then they sent those 1,000 women to the United States for vacation. They had kids. And now these are citizens with full rights in the country who owe allegiance primarily to Russia or China and are going to be used as tools of espionage in the future. It it seems odd that our Constitution would leave us no room to combat that issue. Like
Yeah.
now that's not an originalist argument. That's a policy argument. So I don't tend to make policy arguments because I'm an originalist. But since you brought up policy, like the thing about
But that could play out. It could play out that
it
way.
could well,
It could.
and this is the trick about. I got into an argument about this on Twitter with some people earlier today. I should know better by now. But when you make something a constitutional right, what you are doing is taking it out of the ambit of democratic control. You're saying the people cannot decide that there's a public policy issue here and we want to do X, Y, or Z different. Right. So if universal birthright citizenship is mandated by the Constitution, you can't really fix that problem without a constitutional amendment. So on a policy level, it seems like we might want some flexibility.
I mean, I think we would need some kind of flexibility, or it's just, so messy. Like what I was saying earlier about all of these foreign workers who are, I guess, going to be less and less, but all these foreign workers who have children, it kind of goes to that Plier v. Doe argument. If the children don't have allegiance to the United States, they're not U.S. citizens, then are they going to become good citizens? Where are they going to go? What is their motivation to do well, be in school? Can they work? And I think it would just create kind of do we say the F word on your channel, or do you?
If you feel like it,
It would create kind of a clusterfuck of a generation of clusterfuckness. I mean, like I used to live in California, and in the Silicon Valley, there are bilingual Chinese schools because there are so many Chinese people working in the Silicon Valley. And there's so many people who are here on H-1B1 visas, and then they have children. Same with people from India who are working in that industry. That's kind of the biggest area that I see this being like an issue with the H-1B1 workers. In terms of people who are here already illegally, like without any kind of papers, they crossed the border, in 1989. They, worked in the fields. They had some kids. I could see that it's still, could be a clusterfuck. but I could see more of an argument why those parents might need to be thoughtful, and why those children might not
Mhm.
be entitled under a new law to citizenship. But I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
Yeah. Oh, I think one argument that was raised was the problem of statelessness. Like
Yeah.
if for some reason a kid was born here and they don't get US citizenship and they don't qualify for citizenship from their parents, now they're stateless. That's a huge problem. Now
That's
I don't know empirically whether that's actually realistic, because like the parents were citizens of somewhere. So
yeah.
if your kids come in from Mexico, oh sorry, your parents come in from Mexico illegally, temporarily have a baby, the kid presumably has Mexican citizenship. I don't know why they'd be stateless, but I've heard that point raised. And just to respond to Dan in your chat, I agree with you that birthright citizenship has become somewhat ubiquitous. I don't know what constitutional relevance that has. Like I get that, I get that other countries have a practice. I don't. The only country whose law matters to me when I'm interpreting the U.S. Constitution is ours and 1600s England, because the common law of England impacts U.S. law.
Sure.
Now, but I will say, Dan, what you're right about is in 1600s England, they had birthright citizenship. So there is an argument, and this was in Wong Kim Ark, that the birthright citizenship, that idea should be read in to the 14th Amendment because we inherited it from our British legal heritage.
And we accept that because it's foundational in English law.
Yeah, I mean, well, not for the best reasons. It's foundational in English law because they were feudal. So if you were on a lord's property,
Right, they wanted to
that
have
you were a
control.
serf and you owed that lord work. So like, it was not like a noble thing. It was like you had the kid on my land. That means that's my serf. They have to work on my farms, right? But that was the rule.
Yeah, but kind of the same. We're extrapolating, a constitutional amendment that was meant for slaves, for free people born to enslaved people. It's kind of the same extrapolation.
Well,
not the same, but it's still a stretch, right?
Well, here's the other thing that's really weird about all of this conversation. We're talking about what was meant by terms, and to be candid,
the spirit of the law.
The issue of someone showing up temporarily and having a baby for citizenship was not a real thing in an era where ocean voyages took 3.5 months and you could die. You know what I mean? Like, so the truth is, I don't think this was a big issue back then. I think you'll find people who talk about it, but like in terms of policy, this was a very low priority because it didn't matter. You're talking about like 4 people. That's why there wasn't a lot of cases, because, anybody who was here was a long-term domiciliary, because you can't just leave. Like where are you going? It takes you're going on the Oregon Trail. You're going to take your life on your hand. Like, come on. So that makes the historic interpretation odd, right? Just because this is kind of a modern problem.
Yeah, I'm looking up how many
U.S.
citizens.
Dan, I swear. I'm sorry. Just like I gotta talk to Chad. I swear to God, Dan, don't try to big dog me. I don't want to be an asshole, but the number of people whose legal resumes are better than mine in this country is small, and the odds that they're watching this stream is much smaller.
And Dan, I have to say, Dan also is I believe, a citizen of Costa Rica and lives in Costa Rica.
Yeah, I am not trying to be.
He has a very hemispheric
yes
philosophy. And hello, Dan. Good to see you, man.
It's good to see you, Dan. But
so what I'm seeing is,
let's not play the credentials game. But if we do play the credentials game, I will win the credentials game.
This is what it is, man. Look, around 225,000 to 250,000 babies are born in the U.S. to unauthorized immigrants each year, a number that has been decreasing since its peak in 2007. So and what we have more of is millions of US born children live with at least one authorized parent. So about 5 million in 2016, 5 million US born children lived with an unauthorized immigrant parent. I think that's the crux. That's the spirit of this executive order. That's what the Trump administration wants to stop. And they're again, they know the law, and they're really good at sort of getting every single, and if you did a little bit of immigration law, you know that path to relief, right? That's the first thing you ask somebody who's undocumented, is when they come to you and they say, can I stay? Like this child who came to me this week, it's at my dad's, you know, in detention. Is he going to be deported on Friday? I said, does he have a path to sit? What is his relief? Can he tell the judge that I'm married to a US citizen? No. Now this kid had a 21-year-old brother. And I said, why isn't your brother sponsoring your dad? And he's like, oh, he's working, he's busy, he just doesn't want to. I'm like, well, that's like a family. That's like, the lawyer should have talked about that, because the first thing an immigration lawyer does is say, what's your path to relief? And, you know, I think that this right here, this 5 million children who were just born here, that's a whole lot of immigrants that they, and you know, mixed status families that they want to get rid of.
Yeah, well, I think, and again, it is only forward looking, but so I don't think it would be backwards.
Well, I think they want to stop it. Like these people
they want to stop
obviously can stay. And the Dreamers, there's a question about the Dreamers. Does this onboard the Dreamers, given the established? The Dreamers are a whole different class.
Category,
yeah, that's just that's a very narrow class. And Obama, I'll tell you, Obama really screwed the pooch. He could have fixed a lot of immigration law. He could have codified the DREAM Act. He didn't. He chose Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You know, they could have also codified Roe v. Wade, but that's not the topic of this stream. So, you know, the Democrats have just done nothing to fix any of this. And the Dreamers, really were like, I guess, a political, that was also bipartisan. There was a lot of conservatives, you know, Orrin Hatch was the co-sponsor of the DREAM Act. So I remember I was doing like work with farm workers in California, and there were all these big ag folks that were supportive of the Dreamers. Just because I think that was more like it was just the right thing to do, because there were so many young people that had been brought here against their will. I mean, well, I had students who were driven as a baby in a car and stuff like that.
The thing about the Dreamers in the Obama era, and this is the thing that people don't remember about this, is that if you put up Obama's immigration speeches from 2008, you would think he was MAGA. Like, in terms of like the left v right divide, Obama was talking about deporting everybody. He, like, in fact, did have huge deportation numbers. So what Obama was
doing, opened the family shelters.
Yeah, what Obama was doing with the Dreamers program is kind of, I mean, and you can say whatever you want about the program, but it's kind of a classic carrot and stick methodology, right? I'm going to deport everybody, and I'm going to have pathways to citizenship to incentivize people to do it the legal way, right? But then what happened is Trump won. And during Trump term 1, the Democratic Party took the position for some reason that like Trump is opposed to immigration and maximally opposed, so we will be maximally in favor. And then Biden took office, and the New York Post just reported this. He was told by his staff that if he opened the border, it would cause chaos and have electoral consequences, and he just did it anyway. And the only logic to it I can think of is he just wanted to do the opposite of what Trump did. So I
still don't know what they were thinking with.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the rationale is. And even immigrant advocates and even immigrants were like horrified with the, you know, Venezuela's pushing up and let's talk about that. New immigrants,
the caravans. I mean, it was a nightmare. Yeah, and the thing about it was that made it so frustrating is that all the nuance had been taken out of it. And I don't think that's only Biden's fault. I think that this became an issue where what I would call like the fringe or radical or far left just got ascendant, and people were just listening to them. And I have personal friends who fall into that category. Like, they're buddies of mine. And if you ask them, gun to their head or very drunk, and be like, what do you really think? They'd say, I don't think borders are real things. I think they're like social constructs, and it's silly that some people live with less and some people live with more, and we should just abolish borders and let everyone live where they want. But that's not sane policy for a nation.
Yeah. And how much of the Biden policy do you think went to the Biden administration just not wanting to be the enforcers and not wanting to round up a bunch of, really it was majority Venezuelans, Haitians. That's really who was pushing up on the southern border. Mostly Venezuelans who were pushing at the southern border, Salvadorians. But how much of that was that the Biden administration was like, we just don't want those optics.
Yeah.
And we're just not going to do it. But then what they did, the fix was the shelters and the airfare and the flights. And I mean, I actually strongly believe if you're here as an undocumented person, or you don't have, if you're not a U.S. citizen and you are arrested, you should go. Get your due process, fine. But I really have and that could have been kind of headed off a little bit. I'm still, pretty frustrated about a lot of that. There's so many, folks, they get even simple crimes, shoplifting, theft, but that's the stuff that really makes communities unsafe and unstable. It's not like a murder is 1 in a million, but when you have lots of petty crime, that overrides, it taxes your police force. It makes people unsafe. It's scary. Kids can't walk to school. That popsicle factor, goes down. So I guess we're just, I'm just talking about some of my frustrations with Biden. It's just, they just did nothing, and they didn't do anything to help this. So now Trump comes along. It's like, this sounds great. Let's law and order when it comes to immigration. I mean,
it's not just that he did nothing, right? Like even if you compare him,
I should say nothing to enforce.
Yeah. If you compare him to Obama, because Obama had so many deportations, and you could argue about whether it's an effective policy or not, at least there was a disincentive, right? Like if you cross the border illegally, you are likely to be deported because there's massive enforcement. Now, maybe you just come back again. Maybe it's not a good enough disincentive.
Yeah, people were definitely coming back.
But at least there was some. My issue with what the Biden administration did is they created massive incentives to immigrate. There was, in New York City, you get put up in a hotel. You were given an ATM card. You are given so there's massive amounts of money. Well, but
the New York issue was because of New York's shelter law.
Yeah. But
that was a city issue, right? And, so people who landed there.
And sanctuary state policy is like a whole other can of worms.
Which has no teeth. I really despise. It's symbolic. It's symbolic.
We can fight about that in a second. But
okay.
Let's bookmark that. But my point is, if you don't enforce the border and you have incentives for people to come illegally, then unsurprisingly, you get a lot of people coming in. You can call that whatever you want, but if you have no enforcement and you have incentives, you are inviting the problem, right? I don't know that I know why they were inviting the problem, but I think they were inviting the problem, and the best way I could describe it would be like a catastrophic political error. But when people ascribe something different to it, I can't argue with them too much because it's inexplicable to me, especially now that we saw that Biden was given a memo that said, don't do this, by his own staff, and did it anyway. So there was something going on there, and I don't understand exactly what it was, but it's it's a bummer.
Yeah, it was a huge mess. So do you think sanctuary designation has any teeth at all, other than just making people feel good?
It does.
How so?
Here's my issue with sanctuary policy.
Okay.
And this is I don't know if this is a useful pedigree, but when I tweeted this, for whatever reason, like Governor DeSantis retweeted me. So at least somebody
So you've
agrees
got
with me.
that going for you.
Someone agrees with me on this point. My point was, if you look at Obama's mass deportation numbers, when he got really big numbers, how did he do it? There was a program called Secure Communities, which meant that anybody who was arrested, when they were booked, you ran their immigration status, and if they were illegal, they got a detainer order, and ICE deported them. Which meant
no, they had to be held for 72 hours. Yeah, so it gave an ICE got a chance to come get them. Yeah.
So the point was, he was able to do that.
Yeah.
Without raids.
Yeah.
Because local police jurisdictions were cooperating. That kind of cooperation is illegal under most sanctuary policy. So where I think sanctuary policy is terrible is that if you want to enforce immigration in a sanctuary jurisdiction, your only option is to raid. So it actually
to rate. What is that?
The ICE raids.
To rate. Yes.
The police won't hand people over to ICE or detain them. So if ICE is going to enforce immigration, they have to raid, and the raids are the least humane, most disruptive, like most expensive. Like, it is not the best way of doing it. Yeah. There is a better way of doing it, but the better way of doing it is not possible in sanctuary states. So that's where I think it has teeth. I think it fucks immigration policy because it just makes the whole thing hugely inefficient, and then creates it's almost like guerrilla warfare, where like you imagine like a guerrilla force or like Viet Cong or the terrorists. They want to create a spectacle that creates emotional response that mobilizes people for their cause. That's kind of what sanctuary policy does. It means you can't enforce unless you're willing to put boots on the ground and do the ICE thing. And then once you do that, we're going to run that on the news endlessly.
Yeah, I can see that. Good night. I could see that. But I think sanctuary policy, it still contradicts federal law. And I think it makes it just a little bit harder to enforce. Like sanctuary city, they have to, I guess, hold people for so long. The fingerprints go to ICE. ICE can send down to the local sheriffs, message, say, hold this guy, we're coming for him. And they usually do. It's just how long will they hold them for? And now I think when I was doing this work, it was 287G that was like the Trust Act, I guess, in California, where people were, local jurisdictions were like, we're not going to comply with federal law enforcement. If ICE asks us to hold, we're not going to hold for more than 24 hours. So it's like, but still the feds could come in. If the feds come into your jail and took somebody, they were taking them. It wasn't like the local sheriffs could hide these people. So that's where I think sanctuary status is like a little bit, I guess it just makes it harder for the feds to do their enforcement, but it doesn't negate it.
Well, if ICE shows up and says, give us this person, federal law supreme, they're going to have to do it. But most, I don't have it handy, but if I recall correctly, Portland's law says that we will not assist. So when they arrest somebody, they're not running immigration status and sending a note to ICE. Right? Because they're not assisting.
Well, I think that the fingerprints still go to the Fed. I think they still go through a federal database and they do go to ICE. It's just that they won't hold anybody solely on an ICE hold. So it makes it harder for them to enforce, but not impossible. If ICE gets there quick enough, they can get there, if that makes sense. Where I am, in a pretty liberal county I'm in Maryland. And I know I had a friend who was working in the sheriff's office, and she said that in this most liberal county, that's absolutely a sanctuary county, targeted by Trump and everything. It was named. She was in the sheriff's office, and she said they would run names, and ICE would tell them, hold these people. And they had to hold them. They couldn't let them go. And that's in a sanctuary city. So I still think it's somewhat symbolic, and it does make people feel safer. And it's also, you know what else sanctuary status is? It's a community sentiment. It says you're welcome here, more or less.
Well, so I'm just looking at hold on. I don't have, this is not a law, so I apologize because I was Googling while you were talking.
Cool.
But like, this is Oregon, the state of Oregon's DOJ, and it says Oregon's sanctuary laws say all requests from federal agencies to state or local government agencies or law enforcement about immigration enforcement without a judicial order should be documented, reported, and denied by the local agency receiving the request.
Oh, wow.
So they're saying if you don't have a warrant, we will not, like, if you say, please detain this person and you don't have a judicial order, they're saying no. Right.
And are they doing that still?
This is what the DOJ for the state of Oregon says on their website about their sanctuary promise guidance. So I don't know if they're doing it, but they certainly say they're doing it.
Yeah, it's a promise. See, but there you go. It's the promise guidance. It's still not like the law.
I'm just saying. Yeah. Well, hold on. They then do say, and I have not had time to vet this. They say the laws are codified under 180.805, 810, and 820 to 829. They're very specific and grant exceptions in certain circumstances. So we could go through this, but I don't think they're saying like this aspirationally. They seem pretty invested in not being particularly.
Wait, go back. Let me see what that is, because the sanctuary law just said you do not have to scroll up. Let me see this. Okay, you do not have to share, and you should not be asked about your country of birth. Oh, so there's like see, this is like, you're welcome here. You're safe here. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you, if ICE wants to come in and take you, they will take you.
Your country of birth, immigration, or citizenship status shall not be stored or shared. There are exceptions. I'm sure there are. But it does seem like they are saying they will not assist federal agencies absent a judicial order. I mean,
yeah, I just don't. And then look, state law prohibits from arresting in a court facility while you are traveling to court. Yeah, that's over. Yeah, I mean, I still think that I wonder how much ICE action is in Oregon. And I mean, I just remember a few months ago, and ICE was in Portland, and the protests were hilarious.
They were pretty funny.
I mean, Oregon activists are just like next level. They're just creative, next level artists dancing. It was just so interesting to me. But again, I think that's the sentiment of the people, the population, right?
But this is what I mean. Like when I was saying before that I don't think these things are toothless, like if you wanted to rely on a program like Obama's Secure Communities program, which relies on those detainers and the local community informing ICE that there's somebody to be detained in the first instance. A law like this, Oregon's policy is to not help.
It doesn't, right? It makes it harder, right? It just makes it harder.
Yeah. So then what do you do if Oregon's not being helpful? You raid, right? That's how the way to enforce is by raiding, right? And like to Dan's point, I'm not saying it's illegal. States' rights. I understand your point. I'm not saying it's illegal for Oregon to do what they're doing. I'm saying that when Oregon does this, they are inviting raids. Yeah, but then they protest the raids. They don't like the raids. But their policy is the thing that is creating the raids. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's my issue, Dan. I'm not arguing it's illegal for Portland to do what it's doing. I'm saying that what Portland is doing is making the problem worse, and they shouldn't be doing it because it's bad policy that is making it worse for everybody. I'm not saying it's illegal for them to do that. I'm saying it's dumb for them to do that.
Yeah, and states' rights is, the 10th Amendment says any power not granted to the Fed is hereby reserved for the states. Well, federalism and immigration, I mean, well, let's say this. First of all, federalism is the law. So the federal law will always trump the state law. And the 10th Amendment says that any law that is not specifically, or any issue or any whatever that's not dictated in the Constitution for the federal government is hereby delegated to the states, which is why states run criminal law and education predominantly, you know, just comes to mind. But federal law, immigration is named in the Constitution. It says like only the federal government may deal with immigration. So states can pass laws that give immigrants more rights, but they can't make it more restrictive, which is why some laws in Florida have been knocked out and Mississippi was doing some crazy things, you know, 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, there are state rights, Dan, but they're trumped by federal law. So states have rights, but if there's a federal law that covers it, the federal law under federalism is that's the authority.
It's why they had to say absent a judicial order, because if a court orders them to help ICE, they have state law does not permit them to then violate a federal order. But wait, hold on. Dan says, because, well, then there are no state rights because you appeal to the power of the federal. And I find that funny because you got the other citizens and the other people in your country that treat the states almost as independent nations and consider federalism corrupt. Dan, I think, man, you got like, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole right now. I think I don't want to get one guide here. I think you might need to like come on the show and argue about this sometime, not tonight, because I don't think you understand what U.S. states' rights is in theory. And Lawyer Chick tried to like break it down for you a little bit right there, but like it's not. U.S. federalism is not the idea that states can do whatever the fuck they want whenever they want to do it. The U.S. federalism is about there are certain policies that are better trusted to local government, education, raising your children, local police work, that sort of thing.
It's like a catch-all. It's like a catch-all.
But federal law is supreme. There's no question that like if federal law conflicts with state law, federal law wins, right? And again, when people talk about states' rights, what they're not typically saying it is illegal for a state to do X, Y, and Z. Very rarely are they saying that. Normally what they're saying is we should. It's a moral issue. It would be better if this was left open to the states. Immigration is not one of those areas. I do not think it would be better to leave immigration to the state. That doesn't even make sense.
It would be so messy.
It would be like a giant disaster, right? But regardless, if we zoom back to this case, so here's the argument I've been toying with that I don't know how convincing it is, but it's a fun historical fact that I was unaware of.
Okay.
The 14th Amendment is passed in 1868, right? It says what it says. We've had a little bit of a discussion about how should we interpret it. Before Wong Kim Ark is 1898, and then that starts the era of universal birthright citizenship. Okay. But between those two dates, this did occasionally come up. Not often. There was no universal policy. What happened was people would apply for citizenship and be accepted or denied on an ad hoc basis, right? So there was a Secretary of State called Bayard, and in a number of instances during this time period, like there was a guy, his parents were German, they had him here, and then they all went back to Germany. And then he wrote to U.S., to the Secretary of State, said, I was born in the U.S., I would like to come live in the U.S. Am I a citizen? And Secretary of State wrote back to him, was like, no, you are not a citizen. Your parents were German and they did not have full allegiance to the U.S. The fact that you were born here does not make you a citizen. He wrote similar letters to Belgium, the country of Belgium asked. So he turned down people after the 14th Amendment was passed on this basis. So in terms of the originalist argument, the bookends would be 2 years prior to passing the 14th, the Civil Rights Act had this limitation about complete allegiance. Okay. Then the 14th is passed. Yep. And afterwards, the Secretary of State is still applying that same rule. So he clearly doesn't think it violates the Constitution to apply that rule.
Yep.
So what did people understand that the phrase subject to jurisdiction to mean at that time? Well, it must have meant that you had to have permanent domicile status, at least.
Or it meant you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. now because you're not on U.S. soil. So no, you're not coming back.
Oh, because he was out of the country.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like you're a tourist. You're not coming back. And
but under modern birthright citizenship, he would have it because he was born here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know a few people who were born here and then their parents took them back to the home country. They were raised in their home country and then they came back in high school or something.
Yeah. And that fact pattern where the Secretary of State was denying citizenship. So that I think is an interesting historic argument where they're saying at the time, that's how the US government was applying the law.
Yeah.
Was in this way. Now, I'm sure there's probably counterexamples, right? I don't want to pretend the history is totally one-sided. But I think that's what Trump's going to argue. They're going to argue. They're going to argue that I don't think
the spirit of the law is this, right?
Not just the spirit. If they say spirit, you lose the originalists. I think they're going to say the publicly understood meaning of the law, Justice Barrett and the originalists on the court, was that you had to be at least a long-term or permanent domicile of the United States. And that is consistent with the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It's consistent with the practice before, during, and after the time the 14th was ratified, and is consistent with the holding of Wong Kim Ark. So you don't need to overrule Wong Kim Ark. You just have to limit it in this way, where it does not apply to people who are temporary. It does not apply to people who do not have, a permanent domicile in the country.
I really look forward to Amy Coney Barrett's interpretation of this.
She's so smart.
I'll tell you what, people were really hating on her when she, before she was nominated, just based on her history. When I saw her in her nomination hearings and she didn't have a note and she was just answering questions on these like really particular, I just remember there's one case on civil procedure that she was responding to, and the nuances of this case were ridiculous. And she was just like, remembered it. Like she must have a photographic memory. Mm-hmm. But I love the way she's been interpreting, I just love the work I really do. I shouldn't say love, but I respect where she's been coming down on issues, and she's so smart and she's so reasoned. And she's the one I really look forward to seeing, her questions and how she comes mm-hmm. down on this more than anybody. And I'm not quite sure why. I guess because I think in my move to the right mm-hmm. in the past couple of years and my move towards they say, right, when you get older, you become more conservative. I think that's probably my I guess that fits me to a degree. So it's like she resonates with me more.
Oh, she is by far my favorite justice.
Yeah.
I'm also a big fan of Gorsuch, but she's by far my favorite justice. And I've said this before on stream, but the funny thing about her is that if she were not religious and an originalist and conservative, she would be a feminist icon. She has 7 kids. 2 of them are high school age, right? She's managed to raise 7 kids while having a legal career that's at the absolute pinnacle of her field. Like in terms of like having it all, right? There is no better possible example than her. And to your point, when I love listening to oral argument. I play oral argument when I'm working a lot. And she always has the best prepared questions, the most intricate questions. So I shouldn't say always. We just heard Gorsuch do a really good line of questioning recently, but her questions are incredibly thoughtful and oftentimes so specific to an issue she's working through. You can tell because she'll say something like, No, she won't even just ask the general question. She'll say, assume that I would decide X in this way, Y in this way, and Z in this way, leaving the following residual issue. What would you think about that situation? Like, I don't know. I'm deeply, deeply impressed by her. So I'm with you. Big fanboy of Amy Coney Barrett. She's a tremendous, tremendous justice.
So how do you think she's going to come down on this birthright citizenship?
I think it will depend. This is why I was saying I'm 60-40. I might be drinking the Kool-Aid. I think it's going to depend on this historical argument. If she will not vote to overturn Wong Kim Ark, she will. I guarantee you, she will not. She's a Scalia clerk. She's going to follow Scalia's jurisprudence. Scalia's jurisprudence would not allow overturning that case. But if there's a good argument to be made that the original public meaning did not mean temporary people were under the jurisdiction. If you like the argument I was laying out, 1866, what did they understand this to mean? In 1868, what did they understand this to mean? What did Bayard understand this to mean? If you can lay out that historical case, you could get her on sides. And I think she might be a swing vote. I think I think Thomas and Alito will vote for Trump. Because I for a variety of reasons we could get into, but I'm pretty sure those are solid votes. I think the others, though, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Roberts, Barrett, I think those are up for grabs.
Yeah. It'll be the one to watch for sure, the one to listen to. So how do you think they would define temporary? What is temporary? A tourist visa, you came here because look, if you have no status, you're not permanently domiciled.
I don't think they would define it. My guess about what they would do if Trump wins, and by win, I don't mean, again, I'm going back, win does not mean he gets his whole wish list, right? I think that what they would do is read this language literally. They'd say, we read Wong Kim Ark as saying that if you have parents who are permanently domiciled in the United States, you get citizenship. So to the extent Trump's order contradicts this, it's wrong and unconstitutional. But to the extent you are not permanently domiciled, then you are not a citizen. And I don't think they're going to answer that question. I think they will then let enforcement happen and let new cases happen. And when those new cases come up, they'll articulate it. But I don't think they're good. I don't think they'll try to guess. I think they'll probably reserve that for future cases.
Yeah, and in the chat, permanent domicile for how long? If you are not here legally, you're not permanently domiciled. So that's two things. So permanently domiciled for how long? A permanent domicile doesn't have a length of time. It's about intention, right? And the proof of intent to stay. And like Ryan said earlier, it goes to personal jurisdiction. So where can I be sued? Where can I sue? If I go to court, where is my location that I am permanently domiciled? And that goes to what can I show? What do I have that can show that I plan on staying here for a while? So it's not about a length of time. It's about my evidence of planning to stay for a while. Like, this is going to be my home. And that goes to the driver's license, not just bills in your name, but like some kind of lease, bank accounts, all of that stuff shows permanent domicile. And then, to Garnita's, who needs a hug. Garnita, you need a hug. But if you're not here legally, you are not permanently domiciled. I mean, you could be here legally and not be permanently domiciled. There's people who work here. I know businessmen who have factories in Munich, factories in London, factories in Virginia, defense contractors, and they're not permanently domiciled in the United States, but they're here legally. So I don't think that being here legally means you're permanently domiciled. That's incorrect.
So here's why I don't think the court's going to decide this. I was looking at this is the petition for certiorari from the government. The question presented is whether the executive order complies on its face with the citizenship clause and the law, right?
And it does not.
But here's the thing. it's a facial challenge. There's no facts yet. There's no, there's no enforcement of this law.
Yeah.
We just don't have that kind of information. This is a pure facial challenge. On a facial challenge, I think the court is unlikely to say, well, hypothetically speaking, if you're here for 1 year, that's not permanent domicile status. But if you were here for 20 years illegally, that is permanent domicile status. And in this other situation that's not before us, hypothetically, I don't think they're going to articulate a bunch of rules based on hypotheticals. I think they're going to give a broad rule that says, look, we're not overturning Wong Kim Ark. So we do know if you have a permanent domicile, your children get birthright citizenship. Now, if you are here legally with intent to remain, that's obviously a permanent domicile. There are secondary questions. If you're here illegally, but you intend to remain and you've been here for like 20 years, is that enough? I don't know, but I don't think they're going to answer that in the hypothetical. I think they'll wait for a case that tees that up squarely, right? And zero fucks. I know you call that punting, but really, like, courts are not legislatures. They're not there to answer every question. They're there to answer the case in front of them. And I don't think they have to answer this question to resolve the case. So I don't think they will. I think they'll let the lower courts figure that out, and it will come back up.
Yeah, that's, I think, what will happen. And how now it goes to the sanctuary city, right? So imagine the Supreme Court's going to issue a broad ruling, okay, and then it's going to have to be tested. So you're going to have, Mr. H-1B1 in Oregon, right, working for some tech company in Oregon. They're going to have a child. That child's going to be recognized. They'll get the birth certificate at the hospital. Then you'll have children born in Florida. And watch, just like what's happening now. I bet you're going to have hospitals and doctors that are like, we're not issuing birth certificates to these children. Their parents are not legal. And then that might be how it plays out. You're right. It might come back to the court on those issues when a couple of states have a riff, and then we'll get more definition.
Yeah.
You think that might play, and it'll take years, but that might be how this plays out?
Let's say the court rules in the way I suggested they did, which is Wong Kim Ark is limited to this holding, which means that you need to have permanent domicile status and not be like affiliated with the government of the other country. You can't be like an employee of whatever. Or can't be a soldier, can't be a spy, that sort of thing. If they make a ruling like that, then yeah, I think you're going to have states interpret that very differently. I think you might have like some states say, well, you're a permanent domicile the second you have intent to remain. So if you rent an apartment, you have intent to remain, therefore you are permanent domiciliary. And you'll have other states like Texas or Florida that are going to say, maybe they'll take a position where they're like, look, maybe they'll go maximal. They say, if you're illegal, you're not permanent. But they might also say, yeah, like if you're illegal and you've been here for 20 years, we're not doing that. But if you've only been here for 5 years, that's not permanent. 5 years is temporary.
What if they...
And like I think there will be a split on that for sure.
What if they just deport the parents? Like, you're here illegally, great, you had a baby, now go, right? And that's the antithesis of the anchor baby process, right? Is like people, used to be a myth that if I have children, I won't be deported. That's kind of why Obama started doing the family detention, was like, no, if you have children here, we will deport you. Sorry. So we're going to put you together. We're going to be as like somewhat humane, and we're going to deport you. So I wonder if states will, these super anti-immigrant, and I don't think it'll be a whole state. I think it might be counties. I don't know, but I could see that happening, especially with what's happening now, parents, and, and a matter of public policy. Oh my God, that's going to just de-incentivize people from going to the hospital to have a baby. Right? Yeah. Like, we're undocumented. If we have our kid, parents are going to be arrested by ICE. So let's have the baby at home. And I think I could see lower courts saying that's not good for public policy or for children. So we can't do that. It could get really interesting. And
there'll be some chaos while this is interpreted for sure. Assuming Trump wins on this, which I'm not sure he will. I think this is I think this is a close case. And Cacophons, to your question,
It's a good question.
Yeah, under the current law, so let's erase everything we just said. The law as it is today. If an H-1B1 has a child with a U.S. citizen while here, that kid's a citizen. If they have a citizen with a child with another H-1B1, that child is also a citizen because they were born within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. Now, let's say Trump wins on the ground that I just suggested he might win on. If an H-1B1 visa holder has a child with a U.S. citizen in America, the child is still a U.S. citizen because one of their parents is a U.S. citizen. But if the two H-1B1 visa holders had a child together, they are here temporarily. So that would not be a U.S. citizen because they would not be a permanent domiciliary, because temporary is the opposite of permanent, right? So I think that's how I think that would play out. But again, we're interpreting a make-believe ruling that hasn't happened.
Yeah, and also the idea of the H-1B being temporary, it's not that temporary. Like the H-1B1 is temporary. That's like 6 months at a time. You're coming in to do non-agricultural labor. So you're working in like the crab industry in Southern Maryland, or, you're doing, who else uses a lot of H-1B1 that's not agricultural? I guess maybe some meat packing, even though that's mostly undocumented. But those folks that's 6 months, truly tight. You don't have time to even get a license, get, set up here. But H-1B visas are usually sponsored by their employers. And those visas are usually 5 years. That's a longer time. And most of those people who come on H-1B visas are planning on, they'd love to stay with the company for a while, so they're planning on staying for a while. So that goes, it's a more, even though it's I guess technically temporary is 5 years, that goes back to what's temporary. 5 years, 6 months. What is permanent domicile? Do I have to have a lease? Is just a driver's license enough? Just bills in your name. I think somebody was talking about squatters' rights earlier. I hate squatters' rights. I hate it. So, and that's just craziness, but that doesn't count as a permanent domicile. Just one bill in your name, especially just a random cell-phone bill. No. So that's where it's just going to be, like you say, it's just going to be messed with in the lower courts.
Well, and this is how the law evolves, right? Like it's a messy process, but like, for example, let's say, in the example Lawyer Chick just gave, H-1B1s that are 6 months long are not found to be permanent. They're temporary. But if it's a 5-year plan, they're permanent and therefore create birthright citizenship. Then you're going to have Congress say, well, should we modify the H-1B1 program? Maybe 5 years is too long. So then Congress modifies H-1B1 down. So now H-1B1s are 6 months, but they only add up to 2.5 years. That way, they're trying to get around the Supreme Court ruling. So what you'll see is that branches of government will start modifying based off of the ruling once the ruling exists. Again, it's also possible Trump just loses. Like I don't want to rule that out.
But also, one of the difficult things about practicing immigration law, and why I don't practice it anymore, is that it's always changing because it is regulatory. In I think 80%, like a lot of immigration policy, like regulations, are just regulations. So whoever the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security is, they can change the regulations at any time. So immigration law is one of those funny things where the judges aren't judicial judges, they're administrative judges, and they work at the pleasure of the executive branch. So whoever's in the White House can really dictate what happens with immigration policy and regulations. And look what the Trump administration is doing. They can do a whole lot with immigration law just on the regs. So, like, for example, I did do work when I was practicing immigration law, was all special immigrant juveniles. So with the special immigrant juveniles, that is a law that Obama passed. Special immigrant juveniles can come and they can apply for a green card for themselves, not for their families. There's no chain migration here. But what the Trump administration has started to do is roll back the regulations around what protections a child who has been designated a special immigrant juvenile can get. So it used to be a special immigrant juvenile could come, they could get designated, apply for their green card. They had to wait sometimes a couple of years for their visa to come up, right? For the calendar, the visa bulletin to give them a date, because there were so many people from particular countries applying for visas. So while these children were waiting for their visa date to apply for legal permanent residence, they could get a work permit and they were protected from deportation. They were non-removable. The Trump administration has tried to play with this a bit, and it's swinging back and forth. So all these juvenile lawyers in kind of my world have been very frustrated, and it's been very, very scary for some of their clients who are just in this limbo. And usually while they're in the limbo, they can just be free from the risk of deportation. But now the Trump administration is changing the regs to say, well, yeah, you can still get your green card, but if you're in that waiting period and we find you, you're deportable and you're not getting a work permit anymore. And so that's been a whole bunch of confusion, but that's the kind of stuff that will just make things messier, I guess. But
yeah, one thing I think people underestimate is how much of this is open to executive reinterpretation. Like the difference between, Trump 1 kids in cages era, Biden totally open door incentive, and then Trump 2, right? But what I mean is, like,
remember Kamala Harris, her first, like, she was the border czar, and her whole thing was like, do not come.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to say that sternly, and that'll stop them. Yeah.
Like, that's your plan?
Honestly, I actually think.
Do not come.
Remember when she called him a segregationist in a debate?
Oh,
I think he remembered that, and that's why he made her the border czar. Because if you look at all the evidence, he got a memo that said open border policies will be a disaster. He said, fuck that, I'm gonna do it anyway. And then he made her the border czar. So he gave her a suicide mission. Like, I think he remembered, like, how hard could it be to remember when somebody called you a racist a few, weeks ago? Like, I don't think he liked her very much. But,
yeah, but also I don't think she wanted to be the one to say, even though she was the top cop in California, she was the prosecutor. Yeah, I don't think she wanted to be the one to deal with those optics either. She was not going to go and tell DHS to do anything. So she's like, if I'm the border czar, do not come.
That's what it is.
Let's go to lunch.
I know you had to stop, and I don't want to hold you up. We're having a good chat, but if you need to get going,
yeah, let's go about 5 more minutes.
Okay. Yeah. What I was going to say is, when you do asylum work, you just realize how much executive policy is everything. Like, I had
asylum work is hard.
Like, it's so funny. Like, someone say, like, oh, well, you did asylum work, so your clients must have gotten screwed over by Trump. And it was actually, weirdly, it was the opposite, because my client in the Trump 1 was here looking for asylum. He's a gay man from Russia, and that's not a great place to be if you're gay. And Trump changed the way asylums were processed. So it used to be first in, first out, and there was a huge backlog. Trump didn't like the backlog, so he changed it so it was last in, first out.
So people were getting hearings like right away,
instantly. But
Crazy.
My guy was in the bottom of the pile and was going to have a hearing soon. So when they changed the order that they read the pile in, he got. I changed firms, so I never saw how that story ended because I stopped representing him. But I think he got like 4 or 5 years of time in the country without having to have a hearing because of the Trump policy. So, and that's not a Congress thing. That's just an executive policy thing.
It was, but that was also one of the really smart things that the Trump administration did. And I don't mean smart, like I think it's smart, but it was smart, just objectively smart, because that long wait period was causing people to get roots, get jobs, get lost under the radar, start families, and had the ability, they start building communities, opening businesses. marrying people, having children. And the whole last in, first out was actually really an intelligent way to deal with that problem. So I feel like the Trump administration, probably Stephen Miller, who's been thinking about this for decades, just looked at all the holes in immigration and was like, where are all the problems? Okay, asylees, they're waiting years and years. And not just that, they could go to court and ask for a continuance after continuance. Then there was administrative closure where, we could just close your case for a while. Trump did away with that. That was done. There was no more judges just being able to close your case while we figure out what you're going to do. Now, if you don't come now to court with your plan for relief and actual proof that you are doing it, goodbye, you're out. And I think that's, if they would just let that play out and really enforce some of those things, I think that at least it would get rid of a lot of the newer arrivals, right? And I'm still not, advocating for that. I'm neutral in that, but it would. But instead they're kind of doing everything. And then, for me, I believe ICE and ICE enforcement is just a gift to a lot of donors. I mean, that's just like a money machine, for the government contractors.
Yeah. Well, see, I disagree because of the sanctuary city thing. Like, I think that like, to me, there's a chicken egg thing there, and sanctuary policy necessitates ICE. But
I think you're giving sanctuary policy too much credit.
Well,
I just don't think it's that
like, if you
much.
What irks me about it, right, is it's like, well, they'll say like, hey, shouldn't we? Why are you deporting everyone? Shouldn't we be going after the worst criminals first? And it's like, yeah, we should do that. How would we do that? Well, maybe when you arrest them for DUIs or attempted murder, you would cooperate with the federal government and tell them, hey, we got this person on a DUI and murder. So that's my issue, is that the sanctuary policy prevents the sensible enforcement option. And as long as that's true, it's hard for me not to see it as part of the problem.
I see that. But the sanctuary policy is also a feel good for voters, right? It's for liberal politicians or politicians who favor it to look good and say, we are not going to do, and the voters are like, yay, we live in a sanctuary city, and like that. So,
and raids are a feel good for MAGA voters, right?
Very much so, aren't they? I mean, so this has been really fun. Thank you for having me. We should cover, do this again. I'll see what else pops up on our radar.
Yeah, I'm deciding whether or not I have not yet debated this position. So I'm still deciding whether or not I want to let Sarah know, like, hey, does anyone want to debate birthright citizenship? Because then I got to go whole hog. I'm still
and on that channel, the people who are going to be against it are going to. I mean, I don't know because you're not really you look at it from such a legal lens, and there's no for or against. And what you're going to have is people who come out who are like, as long as they're doing something, get rid of them, and they're just going to argue emotionally. So I think this is a tough argument to have emotionally, because emotionally, I'm sure there's people, Garnita's 42, is probably like across the board, no, H1B1, you're temporary. Nobody gets, and I know other people are very anti-immigrant who would probably agree, nobody should have birthright citizenship on principle, that it's not good and this is why. But when you cover it and you look at the Civil Rights Act of, what was it, 1866 or whatever, and then we look at the 14th, and then we look at the case law, that shines a very different light on all this whole conversation. Not only shines a light, it's a different dialogue to have around the issue.
This is why I always get paired up with Pisco, who's he's a younger, also New York City lawyer who we basically he's a very progressive. So it's why on shows like this I end up getting paired off with him often, and he's very combative. So that turns into a feisty conversation, which is why I found it so refreshing to get paired up with you, because we could actually chat. and have it be like a sane conversation without it turning into like a literal blood sport, which is Pisco and me are buddies. It's not like I have bad blood with him, but we when we get on shows, we fucking just yell at each other for hours.
I don't have a very adversarial style.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, where we agree to disagree. But I came into law from a very liberal, very social justice, emotional place. And it wasn't until the second year of law school where my writing was finally like balanced and I was able to argue both sides. And now, when I teach law, the first thing I teach students is like, do not be emotional as a lawyer. That is the worst thing you can do. Don't be an activist as a lawyer, be a lawyer. Be able to argue both sides and then be able to argue the side that you need to argue, but you have to be able to see it all. And that's, one of the, again, motivation for applying for this fellowship with the MAGA lawyers. We'll see how it goes. It'll be.
I'm very interested to hear how that goes. Please let me know.
They accept it. I'm going to send you, I'll email you my last email that I sent them, like in addition to my cover letter, just like I sent them this, like, and by the way, I know you might look at my resume and think I am not suited for this, but I was like, I learn more from people who don't think like me. And this is it's just like my final. So we'll see. I don't know who's looking at these applications.
And anybody watching this, if you watch me, you've seen me grapple with my history on the left and my late convert to the right. The idea that lawyer chick with her left leanings is applying for a job at Stephen Miller's
a fellowship
at like Stephen Miller's litigation advocacy group is fucking incredible. This is true cinema. So if for no other reason than to see how that goes, give her a follow. I'm delighted. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody.
Follow Lawyer Chick on her channel, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
You bet. Good night, everybody.
Night. Have a good one.
Yes.
Okay. So, does this argument convince anybody who was on the fence? Does it convince anyone who's on the fence? I know that, like, if I'm talking to, like, Naritas, or if I'm talking to Cacophons, I don't need to convince them. I know you guys already are, like, you're all for getting rid of birthright citizenship. But does this argument that I laid out, where you say the jurisdiction language implies limits, the limits must be, something that is based on the original public meaning at the time, because that's what originalism requires. If you look at the history, you'll see in 1866, they thought that if you had primary allegiance to another country, your children couldn't have birthright citizenship. And then they passed the 14th, and immediately thereafter, the Secretary of State was asked the exact same question, Secretary Bayard, about people in Germany and Belgium, and he said no. So clearly, at the time, they did not think that this language meant that you got universal birthright citizenship, because both immediately before and immediately after the 14th Amendment, they did not interpret it this way. Therefore, it should be interpreted to say that there are limits. And what are those limits? Well, let's look at Wong Kim Ark. Wong Kim Ark says you must be a permanent domiciliary. So that's the limit. You must be a permanent domiciliary. We know that's the limit. Now, who's a permanent domiciliary? I'm not sure. We'll figure that out. But does that argument convince people? Does that argument sound convincing to you? Because I'm trying to figure out what I think of it. I was at like 80% Trump loses. That argument got me down to like 60% Trump loses. I think I'm getting close to 50-50 now. I think I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm at like 55, 50. I think that this might actually work. So I don't know. Do you think it does? And if you think it does, or if you just want to set me up for a fall, should I debate this? Should I like reach out to Sarah or Wick and be like, okay, I'm ready to like throw down with people who say birthright citizenship, we must have it. I'm ready to make the legal argument that we don't have to have it. Would that be good cinema? Should I do that? Hmm. Let me know. Let me know. I'm debating whether or not to reach out to Sarah about it. I'm going to give that a think. I think. Oh, let me say thanks to Lawyer Chick for coming on. Good to have her here. She's a very lovely person. It's nice to chat with her about that. Hey, monetization. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, finally got there. And I say finally, we actually did it pretty quickly, to be totally honest with you. It just felt like a long time because I was watching the last couple subs, and get all antsy about it. But yeah, man, thank you so much. Appreciate the 5 and appreciate you appreciating us. The community is growing. We get stronger and stronger. We cannot be stopped. Soon we will be legion. It's going to be insane. And also, how could we not be legion? How could we not be legion when we've got this? America's a propositional nation. We were founded on the idea that there's a particular American philosophy. This philosophy is what binds us. And just like the Constitution tells us what the laws of America are, our moral proposition is found in the other founding document, the Declaration of Independence, which lays out the moral proposition clearly. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government.